Side-scrollers have been around since the beginning of gaming, which means the good ones have to work harder to stand out. Whether their Metroidvania is built on tight movement and layered secrets, or pure action games that run at a pace that demands full attention, every one of them has that quality where you pick it up for 20 minutes and look up to see it's been 2 hours. Most of them flew under the radar on release. All of them deserve better. Timespinner is a Kickstarter project by a solo developer, Lunar Ray Games, built around the most direct possible homage to Castlevania's Symphony of the Night. The UI, the menu design, the familiar system, the exploration structure. That lineage is explicit and deliberate, and the game earns it by doing its own work within the framework. Lunai's, a time messenger whose home is destroyed by an invading empire, doesn't just travel to the past to prevent the invasion. She gradually learns that the empire she's fighting has people inside it whose motivations complicate the revenge trajectory she started with. The orb-based combat system gives each weapon pickup a distinct attack pattern. Some swing wide, some thrust, some spin, and combining two orbs creates elemental interactions that affect different enemy types differently. The time freeze mechanic, which halts all enemies and projectiles in place momentarily, is the puzzle tool that opens hidden areas and creates temporary platforms from suspended enemies. It's used inventively rather than exhaustively, which is the right balance. The soundtrack, composed by Jeff Ball, is one of the better scores in the genre. It captures the atmospheric tension of the environments without leaning entirely on nostalgia for what it's referencing. The difficulty on the default setting is gentler than most Metroidvanias, which some players find underwhelming and others find relief. The time travel structure doesn't weave past and present together as intricately as the premise suggests it might. But the combination of movement that feels good from the first room, a story that earns genuine interest by the midpoint, and a map that expands in satisfying increments makes Timespinner easy to stay inside for a full session. Valda's Story Abyssal City is a two-person development project that, by all rights, shouldn't feel as polished as it does. Endless Fluff Games built a Metroidvania with 4 playable characters: Wyatt, Reyna, Gilda, and Vladin, each with distinct combat philosophies that make replaying the same map feel like a different game. Wyatt fights with swords and martial techniques. Reyna is a mage brawler whose combat is almost entirely magic-driven. Gilda integrates elemental attacks into every basic strike. Vladin came with DLC and brought a gun arm possessed by 100 demons, which tells you the tone is not entirely serious. The combat is the reason to stay. Each character has a cancel system that lets you dash out of abilities before they complete, which turns what looks like a simple button input game into something with genuine depth once you start chaining. Skill trees unlock new moves. Stat allocations shape your damage and defense profile. And the gear system, where items have elemental alignments that interact with enemy types, adds a layer of preparation that rewards attention. Bosses rank your performance at the end of each fight and hand out bonus resources for clean runs, which is exactly the incentive to learn a fight rather than limp through it. The world is dense with secrets, and the map communicates poorly where you've been versus where you haven't, which frustrates some players and delights others who enjoy the mental mapping. The writing is more serviceable than exceptional. Neither of those things undermines the main reason Valda's story holds attention. The moment-to-moment feel of fighting through it is excellent, and 4 characters' worth of replay extends that considerably. SteamWorld Dig 2 takes everything its predecessor did: dig downward, build a cave system, upgrade your tools, find resources, and doubles the scope and triples the quality of the platforming. Dorothy, searching for the missing protagonist of the first game, descends through a world that gets denser and stranger the further down she goes. Each new tool opens both the exploration and the traversal. The grappling hook changes movement entirely. The bombs reshape the digging physics. The steam pressure upgrades push the pace without losing the contemplative quality of chipping through an unexplored wall. What makes it hard to put down is a loop that doesn't have a natural stopping point. You mine resources, upgrade tools, descend further, find a secret that leads to a new area, unlock a new upgrade, suddenly have new tools to test. The game understands that the satisfaction of a digging game comes from the content of the world becoming more varied as you go deeper, and it delivers that consistently across its 10 to 12 hour campaign. The challenge rooms, optional platforming gauntlets hidden throughout the world, are the hardest content and the most replayable, built around movement mastery rather than resource management. The story is light and warm. Dorothy's search has genuine emotional investment despite a modest runtime, and the characters she meets across the game zones have enough personality to make the world feel inhabited. Dig 2 is the kind of game that's nearly impossible to describe as exceptional on any single axis, and yet produces a game session where you look up and the afternoon is gone. Noida Love 2 Devolution was made by one person, Joachim Sandberg, the same developer who later created Iconoclast, and it runs at a pace that suggests someone who had studied Treasure's 16-bit catalog until they understood exactly what made Gunstar Heroes and Alien Soldier feel alive. Zoda Rab, a new Peacekeeper's agent fighting a robotic invasion a century after the original game, moves at a speed that the mouse-driven combat system is specifically built for. You click enemies to dash into them, hold to charge attacks, fling shields anywhere on screen. The right hand controls where the action happens, the left keeps Zoda moving. Learning to run both simultaneously is the game's actual tutorial, and once it clicks, the speed of everything becomes a feature rather than a flaw. Each of the 7 stages runs a different theme and changes the combat scenario. A clock tower with falling rubble and simultaneous mini-bosses, a gravity-shifting puzzle arena, an air combat sequence that briefly becomes a shoot-'em-up. The bosses are the high point, elaborate, multi-phase spectacles that require reading attack patterns while maintaining the click-and-dash rhythm at full speed. The difficulty curve on the harder modes is where the game actually lives. Normal is a generous introduction, but hard with the character unlock adds the friction that makes mastery feel worthwhile. The game is short, running just over an hour on a first clear. 2 unlockable characters, each with entirely different combat styles, extend it significantly, and the score system rewards replaying stages for performance improvements. For what it asks, it delivers more concentrated action than games 5 times its length. Treasure Adventure World is the commercial remake of a 2011 freeware game, rebuilt with new art, expanded islands, and a story that goes darker at the end than the cheerful presentation ever suggests it will. You play as Peep, an amnesiac kid with a hook hand and a talking parrot companion, sailing between 16 islands to collect 12 legendary treasures. The premise is openly breezy, and the game's hand-drawn art and gentle weather system lean into that tone until it earns the right to pivot. The exploration is what holds attention. Each island has its own visual identity, enemy type, and environmental logic. One is a poisoned forest with talking rats, another a haunted island with a castle that predates everyone currently living on it. The tools you carry change how you interact with each one. The hook hand grapples, the magic bottle creates water pools, the boots modify how you traverse terrain. None of these unlock a new section of a linear map. They unlock new approaches to the same open archipelago, which rewards returning to early islands with later tools more than it rewards following a fixed route. The movement is floaty in ways that early sections make more noticeable than later ones, and the combat is thin enough that some encounters feel like interruptions to exploration rather than engagements with it. The boss fights are the exceptions, large-scale, creative, and consistently more interesting than what leads to them. Treasure Adventure World is a game that earns patience, and the back half justifies every hour the front half asks for. Owlboy is the game D-Pad Studio spent 9 years making, and you can feel every year of that refinement in how it moves. Otis is an Owlboy who can't fight on his own. His power comes entirely from carrying companions, using their abilities in combat and puzzles while he provides the flight and the positioning. The dual entity mechanic sustains itself across the whole game because the companion roster keeps expanding with characters whose abilities don't just add options, but change how you approach every encounter. You're never waiting for the game to open up. It opens a little further every time you get someone new. The pixel art is the other reason to play this. D-pad's animation work is generational. Characters move with a weight and expressiveness that goes beyond technical precision into something approaching personality. Watching Otis struggle under a heavy companion or extend his wings at full speed across an open sky section communicates things that dialogue doesn't need to explain. The visual design of the ruins, the pirate ships, the sky civilization, it all coheres into a world that feels like it existed before you arrived. The story has genuine emotional range and lands a finale that earns what it asks of the player. What keeps you from putting Owlboy down isn't urgency, but affection. It's rare to feel genuinely fond of a side-scroller's cast, and this one builds that attachment naturally rather than forcing it. The combat outside of boss encounters is simple enough that the game's strength lies in its exploration and characters rather than its action, which is the right trade-off for what it's trying to do. Iconoclast was built by one person 7 years, and the fact that it exists at all is the first remarkable thing about it. The second is that it's not rough or provisional in the way solo projects often are. It's polished, visually stunning, mechanically precise, and tells a story about religious authority and complicity with a confidence most studios wouldn't attempt. Robin, an unlicensed mechanic in a theocratic world, accidentally becomes the catalyst for a conflict she didn't ask for, and the game refuses to let her, or the player, feel entirely clean about how it unfolds. The action platformer combat uses a wrench as the primary tool, a swing that stuns, a slam into the floor that bounces enemies, and a charge function that interacts with the environment to solve puzzles and create tactical openings and fights. Boss encounters are the centerpiece. Each one is a mechanical design statement, using a specific interaction between Robin's toolkit and the boss's pattern to create a fight that feels like a puzzle and a reflex test simultaneously. Some of them are genuinely hard and among the best boss designs in the genre. The story is the element that divides people. It has a lot to say and stops the action to say it, which tests the patience of players who came for the platforming. The payoff is there. The emotional weight of the back half lands specifically because of what the front half built, but the balance between cutscene and gameplay skews towards story in ways that not everyone will find comfortable. For players who engage with both, Iconoclast is one of the most complete solo-developed games ever made. Chasm is a Metroidvania built on a promise. Every playthrough assembles its map from a pool of handcrafted rooms arranged procedurally, so no two players get the same dungeon. In practice, the difference is subtle. The zones are themed consistently, and the critical path stays legible. But it gives each run a slightly different feel, and a second playthrough through different room configurations catches secrets the first missed. Developer BitKid built the visual foundation as a love letter to Castlevania's Symphony of the Night, and the 16-bit aesthetic earns that comparison without feeling like a copy of it. What keeps Chasm moving is the weapon variety. Swords, whips, spears, flails, axes, each with different attack arcs and ranges that determine the effective distance for every enemy type. The game doesn't hold a single weapon above the others, which means switching based on the encounter rather than grinding one to dominance is consistently rewarded. The RPG layering, leveling stats, a magic system, equipment slots with incremental upgrades, adds enough progression texture that running back through explored areas to clear newly accessible paths feels purposeful rather than obligatory. The story is functional scaffolding rather than anything it asks you to invest in, and a few of the procedurally assembled stretches can produce layouts that feel directionless compared to a handcrafted design. These are real limitations that sit alongside a dungeon crawling loop that, once it clicks, makes it genuinely hard to stop at a natural breakpoint. The game rewards the kind of player who enjoys incremental optimization, finding the better sword, testing on the next floor's enemies, immediately wanting to find the one after that. Mamadora Reverie Under the Moonlight is a short game that wastes nothing. Built in the style of Castlevania's GBA entries, muted palettes, an atmosphere of quiet decay, and movements so precise that fighting any enemy feels like a physical conversation rather than a number check. You play as Kaho, a priestess crossing a cursed kingdom that's slowly going silent, and the art communicates that silence better than most games manage with full narration. Characters that were once alive feel like they were recently. The world has warmth underneath its rot. What keeps you from putting it down is the combat rhythm. Kaho fights with a maple leaf, which sounds absurd and feels completely natural in practice. A fast light attack chained into a charged heavy, a roll dodge that demands timing rather than panic mashing, and a small set of spells that can be swapped to suit different encounter styles. The bow adds ranged pressure for enemies that punish close approaches. The boss fights are the peak of it. Each one a pattern puzzle where the margin for error narrows as you learn until the final attempt feels inevitable rather than lucky. That feeling of having actually understood something rather than having outlasted it is what the best action platformers do, and this game earns it consistently. The game runs about 5 to 7 hours, which is exactly as long as it needs to be. Nothing outstays its welcome. Some Metroidvanias sprawl past the point where the exploration loop stays interesting. This one closes before that can happen, which is its own kind of discipline. Aegis Defenders is the game that figured out how to make tower defense feel like a natural extension of a platformer rather than a separate mode grafted onto one. The exploration sections use each character's distinct abilities as environmental tools to solve puzzles and reach new areas. Then the defense sections ask you to deploy those same tools under pressure, protecting a position against escalating waves while managing two characters whose abilities have to work together. The Fusion build system, which combines both characters' constructs into hybrids neither could make alone, is where the game's tactical depth actually lives. The art is hand-painted and vibrant in a way that feels genuinely alive. Animals move in backgrounds, lighting shifts between zones, and the visual language stays consistent enough that you can read a new area's enemy types from the palette alone. The soundtrack shifts register effectively between the quieter exploration sequences and the active defense phases, and the camp scenes between missions. Short optional conversations earn their place rather than padding runtime. The co-op design philosophy is visible in the solo experience. Switching between characters constantly never quite becomes frictionless, and some of the later defense encounters are clearly balanced around having a second player maintain one character while the other handles something else. Solo players can manage it, but the cognitive load climbs in ways that don't entirely convert from the two-player intention. That's the cost of the design. The reward is a game with a distinct identity that no other side-scroller in the genre shares.